It's our first crossover Thursday of the year. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens and I join forces for our first crossover Thursday show of 2022. We're previewing Jets Ravens. Today on the Locked On Jets podcast, Kevin will lead us back in.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. I'm Kevin Oestreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens. Here with me, John BriteCo, the host of Locked On Jets. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, also on YouTube. And today's episodes of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less in their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. And we're back here, our first crossover Thursday of the year. It's super exciting. We have regular season football. We're going to break down this Ravens and Jets matchup, talking about the biggest storylines. John, I'm just so excited to have football back.
You said it perfectly. It's been a very long offseason. Both of our teams played their last game, Week 18, back in January. We've gone through free agency. We've gone through the draft. We had that long waiting period, training camp, preseason, which was not so great for the Jets because they suffered a key injury or two along the way. Finally, we can talk about some real football.
And I'm excited to do it. We have a ton of big storylines in this game, John, between both the Ravens and the Jets. And I think for the Ravens, first off, the biggest storyline for them is their health. They released their first injury report yesterday, and after what they went through in 2021, you look at a big storyline. It's the fact that the Ravens right now, Travis Jones seems to be the only player outside of the guys who were injured last year. So guys like J.K. Dobbins and Marcus Peters and Ronnie Stanley, those are the players who you're kind of wondering, will they be available for week 1? Only Travis Jones, though, is a player that might miss this game, didn't practice on Wednesday. He was the only one, though, who didn't practice on Wednesday. And that's a far cry from what we were talking about last year here in Baltimore with everyone. The injury report starting to look like laundry list. So I think for me, John, in this Ravens team, a huge storyline is the health and whether guys like J.K. Dobbins, Ronnie Stanley, and Marcus Peters will be able to play. I think maybe 1 or 2 of them will suit up. Possibly all 3 of them could. It's still a little bit up in the air right now, but regardless, it's exciting that they're almost all the way back, if not all the way back for here in week 1.
Now, Kevin, can I copy you and say that for the Jets, the biggest story is health as well? Because I don't know where else to go with this one. Is it okay?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Oh, my goodness. What a day it was on Wednesday for the Jets, because head coach Robert Saleh made an announcement. And it's not a surprising announcement. If you've been listening to the writers close to the team, there was a lot of pessimism that Zach Wilson would be able to play this game. But there was a surprise because Robert Saleh announced that not only is Zach Wilson out this game, he's out the next 2 games as well. And they say maybe he's going to be back for week 4 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This came out of nowhere. When Zach Wilson first went down in the preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles, there were concerns that night that maybe it was a serious injury. Maybe they'd lose him for the season. But the next day, word came out, it wasn't as bad as they were expecting. They said 2 to 4 weeks. And even as recently as Monday, Saleh said, we might have Zach Wilson ready for this game. I have to tell you, Kevin, if the Jets were trying, I'm not saying this is what they did, but I'm saying if the Jets were trying to antagonize their fan base to the greatest extent possible, this is exactly how you'd handle it. Because I don't believe that we went from Tuesday to Wednesday. On Tuesday, Zach Wilson had a chance to play, and on Wednesday, now he's out 3 weeks. I think they knew about this, and for whatever reason, they weren't clear about it. Now, I don't think it, does it make a big difference in, the standings? Does it mean the Jets will lose more games because they weren't honest about it? No, but this is just, if you see, Kevin, you guys are spoiled because you have a competent organization. You have, in my view, one of the best run organizations in the league. The Jets just always figure out ways to antagonize their fan base like this. It's just really frustrating. It's really frustrating to not get a straight answer. This is exactly what happened a year ago with Mekhi Becton. The right tackle, he was the left tackle last year. This year they moved him over to right tackle. He got injured again, but last year he suffered an injury the first game of the season, and they made it sound like he'd be out a few weeks. He ended up missing the full season. The Jets, I don't know why they can't just be straight about injuries. There was talk that Well, they were trying. There was gamesmanship that they wanted the Ravens to think Zach Wilson may be playing this. I don't think the Ravens are like now tearing up their game plan. I don't think the Ravens are now in panic mode because Zach Wilson isn't playing. And there's also some more bad news for the Jets on the injury front because Dwayne Brown, who was signed to replace Becton at the tackle position, out of nowhere he missed practice on Wednesday with a shoulder injury. So Ravens getting some guys back this year. Jets are going to be a little bit shorthanded in this game.
And it feels like with the Zach Wilson now, with him being out and Joe Flacco now being in as the starter, John, we share a storyline in the fact that Joe Flacco will be playing his old team, playing against the Baltimore Ravens. And, he's talked about it a little bit, saying that, he's not trying to quite downplay it, but he's trying to a little bit. But I think it really does mean a lot to him when you kind of get down to it. And I think, John, when you're talking about Joe Flacco, personally, I think the Ravens had a better shot to win if Zach Wilson was playing, because of the fact that for the Ravens historically, and they have a new defense now, Mike McDonald coming in, Don Martindale now in New York with the Giants, the Ravens would feast on these rookie, second, third-year quarterbacks who hadn't seen the Ravens defense, just how exotic they were before. Now, we'll see how exotic they stay with Mike McDonald. I'm excited to see what he can do. But for Joe Flacco, he has been there. He has done that. He's won a Super Bowl, obviously, back with Baltimore during that 2012-2013 season. I mean, that storyline for a lot of the Ravens fans, John, just the Ravens organization, is the fact that they're going to be playing up against someone who means so much to the Baltimore organizational history. I mean, how confident are you in Joe Flacco versus how confident you would be in Zach Wilson?
I am not very confident in Joe Flacco. Now, listen, I have nothing but respect for the career Joe Flacco has had. If he did with the Jets what he did with the Ravens, Jets fans would revere him every bit as much as Ravens fans revere him. But at this point in his career, I just don't know how much he can bring to the table. Now, there is something to be said for Flacco playing, a veteran guy. He's seen it all. You mentioned it. He's been there. He's done that. He knows how to set the protection. He knows how to read the defense. But if you watched him, the one game he played in the preseason, I mean, it was rough. It's not clear how much of an arm he still has left. We also know that, he can't really move it. Even back in his prime, he was not really a guy who was that mobile, and he really has issues moving. He played one game for the Jets last year. It was against Miami, and the offense was really limited by Flacco's lack of mobility, especially as the Dolphins pass rush got home. And when you combine that with that Dwayne Brown news, now we don't know what's going to happen with Dwayne Brown, because as Robert Saleh was announcing that Zach Wilson's out for 3 weeks, he did not even mention Dwayne Brown missed practice. That we only found that out when the Jets released their injury report to the media. But I think it's a tough spot for Joe Flacco, especially if he doesn't have Dwayne Brown because of that lack of mobility. I think, maybe he's got one good game in him, maybe two. I think for the Jets, asking him to play 3 games is a lot. Like I said, maybe there's one good game in him. Maybe it's this week. Maybe it's the Flacco revenge game, but I just don't know what to expect from him. And I wish I was more optimistic from a Jets perspective.
And speaking of quarterback storylines, you have Lamar Jackson, and here in Baltimore, John, it has been the Lamar Jackson contract situation for what seems like forever now. Jackson speaking to the media and, pretty much set the hard deadline is Friday for these initial talks to be tabled. He said the week isn't over, but, with everything that has come out, who knows if the deal will get done by then. But for New York, John, how big of a storyline is just being able to stop Lamar Jackson in this Ravens offense?
I think we're going to get to that a little bit later, but it's huge. And this is a Jets defense that really struggled against the run last year. And I think this team made a lot of upgrades in the offseason. I think they are better in a lot of areas, but the one area where I don't think the Jets are that much better is the run defense. And listen, I have a lot of respect for Lamar Jackson as a thrower. I think when people are crazy when they say Lamar Jackson can't throw. I've been a big Lamar Jackson fan since he was at Louisville. I thought he was going to be really good. But this is a Ravens team that I think is based around the run game. Lamar Jackson brings an element to that. And, it's a big concern. I think that Lamar Jackson, and listen, you guys have no idea how lucky you are to have contract drama, because with the Jets, Kevin, I mean, we wish we had a quarterback we could debate how much money he should make. Our young quarterbacks have not really earned an extension in a long time. But there's a lot that's riding on the Jets' ability to slow down Lamar Jackson in this Baltimore run game this week.
And I think for the Ravens, establishing that ground game is going to be super important. We're going to talk about some keys to this game, though, talking about ways that both the Ravens and the Jets can win this game in the second segment. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on this crossover edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about Turo. And Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. Turo, you can book any car you want, whether you want it from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, and even in the U.K. You can book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event or a birthday or even a holiday. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. You can test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. This boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com.
It's Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, our first crossover show of the season. Jets and Ravens will play each other Sunday at MetLife Stadium. I'm John from Locked On Jets, along with Kevin from Locked On Ravens. Kevin, key matchups for this game. We talked about Joe Flacco. In fact, there's been a lot of attention paid to the fact that Joe Flacco is going to be facing his former team, but I think another former Raven is going to be a key player for the New York Jets in this game, and that's CJ Mosley. And when I think about a key matchup, I don't know that CJ Mosley against one player. I think it's kind of CJ Mosley against everybody because this Baltimore run game is so dynamic. And, whenever you're facing Baltimore, I think your middle linebacker needs to play a key role. But also this Baltimore team, their passing game's a little bit unique as well because it seems to me it's not really based around a receiver. It's more based around the tight end position. You got Mark Andrews. I mean, there's actually a number of decent tight ends the Ravens have, but Mark Andrews is the key guy, one of the best receiving tight ends in the league. Last year, this was an issue for the Jets. The Jets struggled against tight ends. Mosley struggled in coverage. The Jets, I think, need CJ Mosley to play a big game. I think anybody going into this game would acknowledge, even from a Jets perspective, that the Ravens are the better team. The Ravens are favored. The Ravens deserve to be favored. If the Jets are going to pull an upset in this game, there are lots of players who are going to have to step up for this football team. But to me, CJ Mosley is going to have like one of those huge games where, maybe he's disruptive in coverage. He throws up something like 15 tackles or so. So I think from a Jets perspective, CJ Mosley, let's just say CJ Mosley versus the Ravens offense is the key matchup. How do you look at this from a Ravens perspective?
Yeah, there are a lot of areas I look at, but I think one of the matchups I'm most intrigued to see is Rashad Bateman versus Sauce Gardner. I think this is a huge matchup for both. I mean, Sauce Gardner coming in, super high draft pick by the Jets, someone who has so much hype surrounding him, and look, rightfully so, right? He was dominant, and that's even putting it lightly in college and what he was able to do at Cincinnati. Bateman, on the other hand, stepping into a receiver role for Baltimore, the number one wideout. Baltimore trading Marquise Brown to the Arizona Cardinals, and what was a pretty shocking move. I think both teams kind of kept it under wraps. Baltimore doesn't draft a wide receiver to replace Marquise Brown. Really what they did on that front was signing Demarcus Robinson, a former Kansas City Chiefs wideout, just a few weeks ago. So you're right. The Ravens offense, in terms of their pass game, you're going to have Mark Andrews be that number one target, the number one receiver. But in terms of wide receivers, Rashad Bateman is going to be someone who I think there are such high expectations for him. And where I think that's going to be a battle, because while I do think Baltimore's offense is going to maybe move back to that bully ball type that we saw in 2019. Now, not completely. I think Baltimore will throw the ball a bit more than they did in 2019, just because you mentioned that. I mean, Lamar Jackson is a thrower. He's a good thrower. People don't give him a lot of credit for it, but he is a very good thrower of the football. He's dynamic with his legs as well. You can't discount that. But I think in order to get off to a fast start is one of these things that's super important for the Ravens. And I think being able to do that with their play action games, another thing. And I think using their tight ends in that way, as you talked about with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, someone who was drafted in the 4th round out of Coastal Carolina, had an unbelievable preseason. He's someone to me where the Ravens can put him in line. They can split him out wide. They can put him in the slot. So many areas they can line him up on the field. So I think for me, with Rashad Bateman, just how good of a route runner he is, with Sauce Gardner and how dominant he was in college, it's almost like who's going to win that matchup. I think, honestly, if one wins and one loses, I think the fan base of the one who loses is going to be like, oh my God, like, is this the end? Like, was this a bad decision? But it's one game. I think both guys will have their moments, but I think that's one matchup I'm really intrigued to see.
Are you sure NFL fans would overreact to week one? That just doesn't sound like us.
No, never.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned the Ravens tight ends. Obviously, they have a great group of tight ends, but I also look at the Jets tight ends in this game. The Jets brought in 2 tight ends in free agency. They brought in CJ Uzomah from Cincinnati and Tyler Conklin from Minnesota. Now, last year, the Jets came out week 1 against the Carolina Panthers, and they were running like nonstop 2 tight end sets, which made no sense because their tight ends were Tyler Kroft and Ryan Griffin. And Ryan Griffin is on my frustrations with Ryan Griffin are an ongoing joke for a long time. Locked On Jets listeners, Jets have upgraded the tight end position. I think they're going to want to use a lot of 2 tight end sets in this game. I think that they could end up being maybe Joe Flacco's best friends from a couple of standpoints. Is first of all, with this whole Dwayne Brown thing, we don't know what's going to go on there. So the Jets may need to use Conklin and Uzama just to help out on the against the pass rush off the edge. But I'm interested to see whether these guys can get to work against these Ravens linebackers. Maybe help the Jets move the chains on some key downs. So when I'm looking at that side of the ball, I think these 2 tight ends for the Jets they're my key players.
And I think an interesting one for me is I'm going to flip it around what my other prediction or my other matchup was and talk a bit about the Jets wide receivers versus the Ravens cornerbacks. Now, the Jets have a plethora of talent there. They invested in Garrett Wilson in the first round of the 2022 draft after investing in Elijah Moore the previous year. You also have Corey Davis there. And I'm so intrigued by it, John, because just the way that the Ravens line up on defense, they are so versatile with their cornerbacks and their secondary in terms of who can match up where. You can put Marlon Humphrey on the outside. You can put him in the slot if you need to. What's the status of Marcus Peters? Is he going to be able to play in this one? If not, is Kyle Fuller going to see some outside work? Is he going to be that slot guy? They have a couple slot options, if not, like a Brandon Stevens, second-year player, Pepe Williams, who they drafted in the 4th round this year. But for the Jets and just how talented they are at receiver, I know we're talking about Joe Flacco, who's throwing to them, and that remains to be seen how well that's going to go. But John, how do you feel like the Jets wide receivers match up with these Baltimore corners?
I don't know. I'm interested to find out. On paper, this is a solid group. Do they have that number 1 guy, though? I think Elijah Moore could potentially develop into that number 1 guy. He finished last season great. Unfortunately, he was injured. He missed the last couple of games, but he was on a really hot run last 5 games or so that he played. But I think this is a really good matchup. And I've actually been looking forward to this game as a barometer to tell us how good this Jets receiving group is. Now, here's the thing I'll say. In the past, the Jets have entered the season and you've been trying to talk yourself into these receivers. You're saying, well, maybe they'll be okay. I think the worst case scenario is these Jets receivers are going to be okay this year. The question is, how good can they get? And a lot of that's going to be determined by these young guys who are kind of unproven. I mentioned Elijah Moore. I think Garrett Wilson's a player in this league. How good is Garrett Wilson, though? I think Garrett Wilson is the stereotypical high floor guy. The odds of him being an outright bust, I think, are pretty low. Anybody could be, an absolute zero in this league, but I think the odds of Garrett Wilson being an absolute zero are probably as low as any receiver in this draft class. Question is, how good will he get, and how fast will he get there? And then you have Corey Davis, who's also a bit of a wild card because he kind of had a rough season last year. He missed half of it with an injury. He's coming back and experienced. He's the one guy who's got experience at this receiver position. So, how's this for great analysis, Kevin? I don't know. But I'm interested to find out. And I think this game's going to tell me a lot about how good these guys will eventually be.
And I think it's a test for the Ravens secondary too, because last year, John, with how many injuries they went through, Baltimore secondary had a pretty bad year. They were bottom 5 in a lot of different categories. Obviously, I've talked about Marcus Peters, how he didn't play the entire season. They lost Marlon Humphrey towards the end of last year to Sean Elliott, their starting safety. They lost him week 9 against Minnesota. So they were dealing with so many just replacement level players, playing guys. I mean, Joe Burrow put up 525 on them towards the end of the season. That's just, that credit to the Cincinnati offense, obviously, but just how I think downright disappointing it was for Baltimore secondary to play that way. It was a shock. And with how much the Ravens invested this offseason in their secondary, they bring in Marcus Williams, they draft Kyle Hamilton, they bring in Kyle Fuller. They have so many other options there. But I think for Baltimore, John, somewhere where I'm looking is the running back position in the run game, as you talked about. Because again, right now we don't know if J.K. Dobbins is going to play or not in this one. If he does, I wouldn't even expect him to play that many snaps. I think it's more just getting him on the field, getting him comfortable a little bit. He's their best running back when healthy. There's not a huge debate about that. Gus Edwards is in that conversation too, but he's on the PUP list. But so how are guys like Kenyon Drake, Mike Davis, Justice Hill going to run behind that offensive line? I mean, look, what they have this year at this time is a lot better than what they had last year because they had to bring in Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell. If we're talking 2015, that's an all-pro team. but we were talking about it in 2021. So I think Baltimore, it's going to be key for them to establish their ground game early, really also on first down, getting into second and short situations, being able to pick up those 2 yards on second down instead of having to pick up 10 yards or 9 yards. And that puts them in a third and long. So that's one area I'm looking out for. It's kind of like a key matchup for Baltimore is the Ravens running backs and even offensive line versus that Jets front seven, how they're going to deal with that.
Absolutely. And those are great points there, Kevin. All right. Well, we've heard about the key stories. We've heard about the key matchups. Ahead here on this crossover Thursday episode, Kevin and I are going to make our predictions for week 1 between the Jets and Ravens. That's ahead here on this crossover edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets.
We're back here with our final segment of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens still here with John BriteCo of Locked On Jets. And I do want to say thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, go check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. Local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combining into one Ultimate NFL Preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And John, we're previewing this week 1 game here between the Ravens and the Jets to kick off 2022. And there are a lot of predictions to be made across a ton of different areas. I mean, how do you see this game going for the Jets? Do you think this is a game that they have a realistic shot to win? Or do you think that this is a game where it's just maybe too much to play against the Baltimore Ravens team in week 1?
Can I say both? So here's the thing, Kevin. Last year I was awful at making Jets predictions. And there were a couple of games where I said the Jets had absolutely no shot. There was a game against the Tennessee Titans. And then there was a game against the Cincinnati Bengals. You know, the Titans finished the number 1 seed in the AFC. The Bengals ended up going to the Super Bowl, almost won it. And the Jets beat both of those teams last year. Meanwhile, every other week I'm picking the Jets, and they're going out playing terribly. So, yes, they have a shot. And yes, I am a big enough Jets fan that I was all ready to pick them this week with Zach Wilson under center. I think week 1, weird things happen in week 1, Kevin. And listen, there's no question the Baltimore Ravens are the more talented team. I think the Ravens could have a big year. I would not be surprised to see the Ravens be at the very top of the AFC. But, you know, week 1 in front of your home crowd, you know, as I said, sometimes unusual things happen in week 1. I was going to map out a path for the Jets to have a victory, and it could happen any given Sunday in the NFL. Joe Flacco could just go. Maybe Joe Flacco has that one last great game in him, and it happens this week. But looking at this objectively, you know, even if I was to buy into Flacco, this Dwayne Brown thing scares me. I think the Flacco under center, that could be a big problem for the Jets. I think the Jets did a good job in the offseason building their defense. They improved at the corner position quite a bit. They improved their pass rush. And I said this on yesterday's show, for the bulk of the season, that will pay dividends for the Jets. But this is a tough matchup for them because this is a team that is not really built to stop the run. Robert Saleh, even as he's building his defensive line, doesn't really value run stopping. He values getting after the quarterback. And again, against most teams, that's a really good thing. But against the Ravens, makes the matchup tough. And I mean, the other thing is, it's always tough to pick against the Ravens if you think it's going to be a close game because they have such an advantage in Justin Tucker. Jets went out and got Greg Zuerlein this offseason. You know, we'll see what he's got left in the tank. I'm actually kind of optimistic on the signing, but the Ravens are never going to leave points on the field with Justin Tucker. So I think all these things are combining. I think the Jets play hard. I think the crowd's into it. I think the Jets are competitive, but I think I'd go maybe Ravens 24, Jets 17.
Yeah, you're right in the ballpark I have in terms of a final score prediction. Here's my thing with the Ravens. A couple things. One is they've been such a dominant week 1 team in 3 of the past 4 seasons. Now that 1 year being last year where they lost in overtime to the Raiders. I don't have the exact stat, but I think that the margin was like 142-17 in terms of how they outscored their last 3 week 1 opponents, not including that 2021 game. They're also a team that I think is really, really looking to have a bounce back year, and they want to start off extremely strong. They were mad about the way the 2021 season went for them. Chuck Clark, their safety, got up on the podium after their Week 18 loss, which effectively eliminated them from the playoffs. And just literally didn't say anything. He just said, watch how we bounce back, and left. That's all he said. So for the Ravens, this is a game that I think they match up decently well all across the board. I think with the improvements they made in the offseason, I mentioned Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton. Morgan Moses, a former Jet, coming in to play right tackle for Baltimore here in 2022. With that improved offensive line, I think Tyler Linderbaum slotting in there as well, that first-round center. And obviously, the Lamar Jackson effect is real. In the way that this Ravens offense, I think, is going to incorporate going back to those heavy tight end sets, using the play action. Guys, the Ravens love motion. They've been one of the highest motion teams over the past couple years here. Greg Roman utilizes that a ton, moving fullback Patrick Ricard across the formation. They can play him in line. So I think for Baltimore, the way their health situation is right now, which is admittedly pretty great considering where they were last year and just what they were dealing with, and also the fact that they are going to be, I think, looking to come out with a vengeance here in week one. I have 30-17 is my final score prediction. But, John, I'm interested to hear about your predictions for Joe Flacco. You said you're not super confident, but do you feel like this could be a game where he at least puts multiple touchdowns on the board, or do you maybe see multiple interceptions for him?
Again, maybe both. So last year he played a game against the Miami Dolphins, and it was not a great performance by any stretch of the imagination. But if you look at the box score, it was pretty good because he hit Elijah Moore, and Elijah Moore took one to the house. So I don't know if it's going to be Flacco, and I think it's maybe Jets receivers making big plays. Maybe Elijah Moore, takes a slant and goes the distance. Maybe he can break a tackle. Maybe Garrett Wilson does the same thing. So I think Flacco's statistical game could look good if the Jets receivers support him. And look, at this point, I think he's more of like a distributor. He's not a guy who's going to be responsible. He's not going to be the reason you make big plays, but he can get the ball to playmakers, and maybe that could help the Jets stay in this game. And who knows, maybe surprise people. Listen, I've been wrong on a lot of Jets picks, so I'd be lying to you, Kevin, if there wasn't a little reverse jinx strategy in my pick there.
The reverse jinx is real. Don't get it twisted. It is a real thing. So I give you credit for doing that. But I think something that also, John, prediction wise, I personally think the Ravens will probably run the ball a bit more than throwing it in this game. Not saying they're not going to throw it at all. I think it's going to be a big part of what they do. But I think on the Jets side of things, you're looking at a team that still has Michael Carter. They brought in Breece Hall, invested a pretty high draft pick into him. But we talked about those receivers. Do you think, obviously game script does play a big part in this, but do you think at the end of the day, the Jets are going to throw that ball more? Or do you think they might run it?
So I don't want to make a bad prediction for the Jets, but since we're making predictions, my concern is that they're going to get too stuck on the run game, because this is a team that's built to run the football. You imagine it, Hall, Carter, two recent draft picks, two quality backs. I think this is going to be a really good 1-2 punch for the Jets, but it's a new offensive line. Dwayne Brown came in the middle of training camp. Mekhi Becton got hurt. The Jets brought in Dwayne Brown. They played together for a couple of series in the last preseason game against the Giants. That was the only work they had together all preseason, and it was a struggle. And I think in the long run, if everybody's healthy, these pieces are going to fit together. It's going to be a pretty good offensive line, but you can tell the chemistry is just not there. It's not going to happen this quickly. So I think the early part of the season, this first month or so, these guys are going to learn how to play together. And I think the run block is going to be an issue. I think the Jets may get off to a slow start running the football this season. Now, I think once we get to October, November, December, you're going to see a team that runs the football really effectively. The early part of the season, though, it might be an issue. And I wonder whether offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur is going to be willing to get away from the run if it's not working, because I think especially in a game like this, Jets are going to have a tough time stopping this Ravens offense. Jets are going to need to put points on the board. And as much as I have questions about Joe Flacco, the Jets do have some playmakers at the receiver position. Will Mike LaFleur let them do it? I worry about that from a Jets standpoint. I think I think the play calling is a bit of a concern. Will Mike LaFleur stick with a run game if it doesn't get off to a good start? He may just be committed to it, maybe a little bit too committed to it.
And I think the Ravens had that last year on defense with the blitz and Don Martindale. And it was a live by the blitz, die by the blitz mentality where if the blitz was working, you continue to do it. If the blitz was not working, you'd continue to do it. And I think so some of that aspect you kind of talked about with the Jets in the run game. But John, I do want to get into like one bold prediction for you for the Jets. And mine for the Ravens is, look, I think the Ravens pass rush, the outside linebacker group is one that has a couple question marks. They have two healthy outside linebackers on their roster right now, Odafe Owe and Justin Houston. They're waiting on Tyus Bowser to come back. Odafe Owe is poised to take a huge leap. I'm going to say with the uncertainty at the tackle position for the Jets right now and the way that I think Owe is going to take a leap, I'm going to say bold prediction, 2.5 sacks for Owe in this game. Do you have a prediction for the Jets?
I think Elijah Moore goes over 100 yards in this game. That's my bold prediction, because I think Flacco is going to be looking for him. again, I think with the issues the Jets may have on the offensive line, they're going to scheme some things up to get him the ball quickly, get him the ball in space. I think he makes a couple big plays in this game, and I think the Jets stay in the game, and I think Elijah Moore's got a big part in that. Well, thank you for listening and thank you for watching. It's always great to do a crossover show with one of my fellow Locked On hosts, but that's all for today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review, and if you're watching on YouTube, please give the show a thumbs up. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk more Jets.